I assume that, like many of you, or that many of you are like me, is what I should say, spend a good portion of your workday on email, composing emails, reading emails, perhaps communicating with folks that you've never met face to face. That email is your primary mode of communication, even if you're in the same town or in the same um, company or organization. That a lot of our communication happens via email. And our goal today is to make explicit the choices that we make when we compose and send emails. We do these all the time, and they're so ubiquitous that perhaps we don't even think about all that we're doing when we compose and send an email. So we're going to take time today to think about all of those choices. And also to consider how email has changed with the impact of texting and other ways that we communicate electronically. That's changed a bit how email appears and how we treat email. So we're going to talk about all of those things.
Yeah, excellent. And I would just add, oh, there we go. Thanks. I'm Amy Rado Parks. I'm one of the associate directors at the Writing and Public Speaking Center. And likewise, I feel like written communication is an interesting way to think about a lot of the work that we end up needing to do. And email is a good catch-all for thinking about it, but it will be interesting throughout the talk for this hour to also think about other spaces in which you need to record that where you need to write, where it's recorded in some way, whether it's a Slack channel or whether you're doing texting, if there's like a common texting app, any of those things. So we're talking about email ostensibly, but really what we're looking for is thinking about the choices that are going into our writing, especially in moments where we just need to reply. Sometimes we just are like, I just have to make a quick reply. And kind of pulling out and thinking about that stuff for a moment. So we want to really start out with this idea. This looks like we've come out to a chart that looks totally unrelated, but what we'd like to do is start by thinking about some underlying concepts of just any writing situation. So this is any time we sit there and we're using words, whether we're typing or we're using our thumbs, whether it's at work or in personal life or entertainment, whatever. We are always using words in a space that is it has a number of elements in place. So there's always a writer or a speaker, there's say you, right, sitting there. You have an intention or a purpose. There's something that needs to happen. It's about a topic or a subject, and there's someone on the other side of it. There's a reader or there's an audience. So this is the main thing that distinguishes it writing in your journal in the morning, right? That is yours and you keep it. This is automatically different because it's the intention is that it communicates something to someone else. The other element of this around the outside, we have genre. So genre, you may think of, it often makes me just think of films. Like if we see different genres of films would be comedy or horror or a documentary, right? So it's different types of writing. So just like we were saying, a text might be feeling similar or different to an email, or which is similar or different than like writing a report. So there are lots of different ways we can write. In this context, we're talking about something more like email that is a direct communication to another person. The genre of an email, one of the things that unifies it and with all the sort of mini genres we're talking about right now is that it's generally short. It's generally meant to be read and acted upon in some way. Sometimes email can be a record of something. We'll talk about this a little bit more later in terms of the purposes of it. But when we kind of pull out and look at these big concepts of like, there's a writer, there's a topic, and there's an audience or a reader. These are some of the main things we're going to come back to kind of loop through a number of the other things we're going to talk about in the next hour. Also, just so you know, our plan is we're going to talk a bit at the beginning, and then as we move through to the middle and toward the end, we'll have some things we are hoping that folks might respond to in the chat, just sort of low stakes answers and thinking about maybe your own way you might engage with some of these ideas in your writing.
And I would just add too that the context for an email is considered like it's your workplace. It is the week um, before Thanksgiving. And there are deadlines that come due. I mean, those are all like part of the context of work email, which is different from emailing your book club or your family members about a gathering that's going to be happening soon. So as Amy mentioned, let me try to figure out how to advance the slide. There it goes. Sorry for the fumble. So work email is a genre. It is where a lot of the work gets done at our organizations. This work can be archived and it's searchable. So it's not sometimes it's written instantaneously and very quickly, but it often provides a permanent record at our workplace. Another thing to keep in mind is that other people may read your email. It may get forwarded to someone else. It may be a record at your institution. So even though it can be casual and immediate, its impact and it has lasting power. So it may be around for a long time.
Excellent. All right. Yeah. So this is sometimes don't like to think about, right? The fact that it lives in a searchable space. But often organizations, that's true. Okay. So I want to come back a little bit to the previous slide also. We were talking about email as a genre and its context in the workplace. We want to elaborate a little bit more on what these categories are. So subject and the topic. So these are intended as questions to hold in mind, maybe especially in those moments when you have a sense that you should pause before you're like, you want to double check, like, did I say what I need to be saying? So here are some things to think about. So it really is, what is the email about? So trying to limit an email to a small number of topics. The subject could somehow, if the subject could also be the audience, use caution. So if that means if the topic of the email is a person, then it can change the stakes of the email, right? Often, and especially when we're working in, human-centered workplaces, there's a variety of ways that can be true, but this is just to point out that if writing an email about a person can be really different than writing, say, about a process or a follow-up or a report back on something, is really different. Is this about a specific thing? Like, it's nice for the audience to get an email about one thing sometimes versus like one email about 8 things, which can be difficult to figure out how to reply to. And it can actually be difficult to loop back to and find that the conversations can get a little bit unwieldy. So the speaker and the writer, you are the writer in this case of an email. So this sounds funny, but what do you know about the topic? How do you feel about the topic, and what's your relationship to the reader? So sometimes we are writing about things that they don't mean that much. We're just following up. We're saying, hey, we talked about this thing. I just want to follow up so we can remember that we want to talk about it again. But sometimes that thing is something that is like weighty for one reason or another, or maybe you feel tension about it, or you're not sure what the other person thinks about it. So that's often a scenario where we are pausing to think because we feel weird about it. There's something there where we're like, I feel like I'm unsure about what I'm about to put in this email. So often it can be because either we don't know the audience well, or they don't know us well, or we're not sure what we need to be saying. So these are moments, these are moments that they're great moments to flag. They are very self-aware moments to pause before hitting send. Another way to think about this too, in terms of the audience, is what do they actually know about my topic? How might they feel about the topic? What's their relationship to the topic? What's their relationship to me? So at this point in our talk, we're just talking about kind of getting wider, thinking a little bit bigger about the choices we might make. We're going to come back in a later slide to talk about what answers to those questions might lead to writing a different kind of email. Like, in which emails do I want to be really casual and lighthearted, and which other ones might I want to be a little bit more studied in what I want to say to someone. Finally, what do you want your audience to know? This is often a very important part of it. What do they need to know? Do you need them to do something? What is the actual takeaway? from the email. All right. So this is also something that I put out there because, it's important to talk about the relationship between the writer and the intended reader. So we are here talking about writing emails. We all are bringing various levels of abilities to use writing to communicate. So writing is really different than speaking. I know that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but it's useful to say here because both are different kinds of skills in communication. And we all bring a lot of different histories to written communication. And we have different styles. We have all kinds of things. But when we rely on written communication as a core workplace space, tensions can accidentally arise because of varying abilities to write and also varying abilities to read. So one of the other things is thinking about how we all understand tone differently, and how it sounds to us in writing, based on our experiences as readers, based on our experiences as writers, how much we're able to control the tone we use to write, and also how we interpret the tone as readers, which is often impacted by our relationship to the audience or to the writer. If we're the reader, sometimes we just fill in what we understand about the writer, and that impacts the tone. So we're going to also talk about tone, but this is often the space where there can be miscommunications, and it doesn't have as much to do with the content of an email as it does communicating something besides content, which has to do with the tone. It has to do with the relationship that is being built through the email versus the content of the email. And this is one of those kind of spaces that all of us experience at one point or another, but we're not often sure how to talk about it or how to understand it. So this is one of those spaces to start thinking about how we understand writing and tone, how we understand the tone also as readers.
And I would just add too that nowadays we don't know where people are reading these things, how small their screen is. So if they're reading these emails on a phone, it's very different from a big computer screen. So just how much you can talk about, how long your sentences can be, that impacts how people are going to read. And that's something we don't have control over. We don't know how they read their email.
Yeah. Excellent. So one thing to think about to just kind of expand a little on this idea of intention or purpose behind an email. If you are someone who, there are lots of different people have a lot of different experiences with workplace email. Some people feel overwhelmed by it. Some people kind of blast through it. Some folks, and this is also a space where you don't get a lot of feedback. A lot of times we often assume that whatever we're doing is fine unless we have a very aware conversation, maybe with somebody we are emailing with often. So it's useful to back up and think sometimes if you're in that space where you are writing in a scenario where you've paused for whatever reason, you've kind of stopped working on the email because there's some question happening in your head. One of them is to really consider why you are trying to write the email. Are you trying to inform someone about something or explain something? Do you need to request information? Are you writing to brainstorm or explore an idea with somebody? Do you need to persuade them of something or defend an idea? Or are you trying to just connect with them and befriend over something? So with any kind of writing, there can be more than one purpose. We can be writing to connect and befriend and also inform, or to connect and brainstorm, or to request information and persuade. Any number of these things, we could be trying to do all of them. Would be kind of a complicated email, I think. One of the things that complicates emails, though, is when we aren't aware that we're writing for a number of purposes. And so sometimes maybe you've received an email like that where you read it and you're like, wow, a whole lot just happened. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of it. What am I supposed to do? So sometimes we maybe experience this on the reading side where we're like, this person sounds really friendly, but also they're defending themselves. I don't understand. So it can be useful on the writing side to clarify, like, what am I trying to do as I sit down to write this? All right.
And I think, as Amy said, it's useful to kind of go out, think about your relationship to the reader. That is as important as the purpose. So I want to inform them, but also this is a new colleague and I want them to feel that I'm an ally. So that will inform how you communicate with them about a given topic. So it is important to think macro. What is my relationship to this person and what do I want it to be going forward? And sometimes messages that we give can be complicated, or we can be irritated or frustrated with a particular process, and that can come through in our emails. And thinking again about our goal for the relationship is important as our goal for a particular email. So we have our purpose and our audience, and those will help us make decisions about what it is we're going to say, how we're going to say it. So it's going to help us figure out whether we're going to be familiar, or a little more formal. Are we going to be really terse and really short? You know, I need you to do this by tomorrow. Please respond to this email. Thinking about our purpose and audience also helps us figure out where we're going to enter into the relationship and the conversation. Where are we going to start the email? So for example, you might have had a staff meeting with everyone and you wanted to follow up to remind people that they have something due to you by tomorrow. So you don't need to tell them everything that happened in the email. You may choose to attach minutes if that's appropriate from your position, but you don't have to go into all the detail about what happened at the meeting. If your purpose is, hey folks, remember that I need your vote on this particular topic, the restaurant for our holiday party. I need to hear from you by tomorrow. Please respond to this Survey Monkey or respond via email. So what it is you need from them, when, and how they should deliver it to you. And the more complicated your purpose is, and the more complicated your relationship to your audience, will impact how many times you need to review your email before you send it. I often, if I have to send a touchy email, so say I've had someone send me a complaint and I need to respond to them basically saying, thank you for taking the time to write to me and voice your concerns, but I'm going to have to say no to your request, right? So it's a challenging situation diplomatically, but I don't want my tone to sound cranky. So sometimes I have people read those. It's like, how does the tone sound? Do I sound like I want to be helpful, but the answer is still no? I encourage you all to have that person in your life who can check those delicate emails for tone to make sure that you are communicating the way you want to be. So again, tone comes through with the words we choose, how short our sentences are, and tone can be so easily misunderstood in an email. So think about that, especially in those sensitive type emails. Think about how you're saying things. Are you starting your email with something that's going to connect you and your reader before you give them the answer that they don't want? Are you going to acknowledge the appropriateness of their request, even though the answer is no, for example? Tone also includes the word choices you use. So is this pretty formal? Is it informal? And you're thinking about who is your audience. So if you're writing to someone on your team, as opposed to someone in the public, the words you use are going to be different. Oftentimes you may have some shorthand internally with your team that you wouldn't use for people outside, that would make them feel excluded because they wouldn't really understand it.
Yeah.
So so thinking about our audience helps us determine which words we use. Also, phatic speech is an important part of email, but how much of it is appropriate? Personally, if I get a long email that starts with a full paragraph about the weather, I'm a bit annoyed because I want to get to the point. But a sentence or two or a short phrase is fine. And that really depends on your context as well. Who is your audience? Do they expect more of that? Did you see your reader at the good food store last night? And do you want to say, hey, it was nice saying hello to you? That can be a nice little connection. But then to go on and talk about the holiday display, the good food store, might not be appropriate. That's too much phatic speech. But a lot of this is context driven. So in this particular team, how much is appropriate and how much is too much?
I think often another part of that phatic speech or some of that chit chat I notice too. I notice where I pause, I'll open an email and I'll jump straight into writing a thing. And then I realize that actually I'm writing the email to ask this person to do something for me. So maybe I should say hi first, like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. I hope you're doing good. Also, remember that thing you said you would do. I actually need you to do it now. That feels, because it is still like writing is still a social situation. Sometimes we think of it differently than standing and talking to someone or being on Zoom or whatever, but it does remain a way that we engage with each other socially. So some of those same urges we might have socially can be good to act on in writing. I mean, tone, it is the thing that's hard. Like if you opened an email that says, hey, I haven't heard from you lately, that could sound really warm. Like, oh, I haven't heard from you lately. How are you? Or it could sound like, I haven't heard from you. Do you have an update? Do you have a report? Where have you been? So it all depends on the relationship. When you're comfortable in writing back and forth with someone all the time, you stop thinking about it. But say you have a new member on the team, very quickly we can be like, wait, we don't know how this person is in writing. Maybe they're not grouchy, but they seem grouchy. Maybe I seem grouchy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that before you jump in and ask for something, you want to lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the elements of an email. Again, you probably all know this, but let's make it explicit what each of these are doing. So we're writing to a particular person or a group of people. So that's the addressee. And then we are the sender. However, it's important to think about things like, for example, in the Writing Center, we have a common email that doesn't have anyone's name attached. So it just says Writing Center. So when we're responding from that, we need to give more information when we're responding to people because it's not obvious in the email address. And that may be true for you, or you may have met someone only as Emily and they don't know your last name. So you might need to remind them who you are when you're writing them. CC, these old terms, it comes from carbon copy, back when people had typewriters and carbon paper. So that's just when you're copying someone. So the copied person is not the addressee, but it's someone who's going to eavesdrop on your conversation, and you want your reader to know that this person is copied on it. And again, that's a decision to make, right? When do you copy people and when not? Blind copy is useful, and I use it primarily when I'm emailing a group of people and it's not appropriate for me to share those email addresses with everyone. So I use blind copy for the whole group. You could also like hide that you're copying something, a sensitive email, and maybe you want your boss to know, but you don't want the reader to know. Those are sensitive situations. Line is so important on an email, and especially on an email chain that where the conversation evolves and then you end up talking about something else. It's important to adjust the subject line so that it clearly identifies the topic of the email. And it can also identify what you want the writer to do. Response needed, for example. And then most workplace emails should start with a salutation, and how you greet your audience depends on your relationship with them. Do you need the title, or is it, "Hi folks," or first name? All of those are choices that we make depending on our relationship with the addressee. The content, again, it should be concise. Try to keep it as short as possible. I haven't done any, I don't know the current research on this, but I could tell you anecdotally that if you have like 3 topics in an email, people tend to only respond to the first one. They don't get to the second or third in their responses. They may read it, but they may not respond to it. So keep that in mind, that you want to constrain how much you include in an email. And then finally, you want to sign off somehow. And again, depending on your relationship to your audience, it might be sincerely, it might be warm regards, it might be talk to you next week, and then you should enclose your signature. And for workplace, you often have a standard signature that will go for all of your emails, that will include your position and the department that you are in.
I would jump in and add to just really quick about the subject line. Subject lines can play an interesting role, a couple of different interesting roles. One, getting the person to open the email. So if you're writing in a situation where you really need people to open an email and you realize the chances are high that they won't. For example, I have an email I have to send to all undergrads each semester at UM, and getting all undergrads to notice and open one particular email in the flood of emails is always, there's a lot of attention put on the subject line, because they need to have some reason that tips them over into actually clicking, because there are so many emails. However, in most of my work emails, the subject line is low stakes. I'm in a continued conversation. So the subject line is just reminding the person that we're in this conversation. Like I could say, follow up about blank. But for me, one of the things I'm usually thinking about with the subject line is, can I search for this and find it later? I use email a lot as like an impromptu filing system. So if I want to find this later, then one of the things it searches is the subject line. I mean, often it will search the body of an email, but it's going to privilege the subject lines. So if I know it's about the specific project, UPWA 22, UPWA Fall 22, I will always make sure that is somewhere in that subject line, because if I need to track my correspondence back, I know for sure that's what I'm going to search. Whenever I go out of bounds and do like some quirky abbreviation, I drive myself insane trying to find it again. So it's a little bit like a present to yourself to use email as a bit of an archive, so we can all go back through. So the subject line is the best place to do that, especially if you can't remember who you sent it to, or if you sent it to tons of people. If you're searching in your sent box, either way, it can pick up the subject line. So the subject line is a place where I find myself putting a lot of thought at the last minute on a number of different levels. Once I know someone's going to open it, then I can think about whether it's something I could find again.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, where the audience of the subject line is the person you're writing to, but it's also your future self, so that you can convert the conversation.
Yes.
That's an important.
Yes, I've had times where I'm like, why did I call it that? Oh my God, I can never find it now. Now I can't go back. Yes, it's funny.
And what I find is in an email chain is that sometimes the conversation just evolves and then it morphs into something else. And then then the subject line, it isn't searchable because it was about last week's meeting, and then it turns out to be about a new workshop that we're designing.
Yes.
It's going to be next month, and it's hard to find that. And that will change, especially when it's all hidden under one subject line. Okay, so here's a sample. Let's look at this. So the subject line, well, so it's from Victor V, and we have the email address, and then we have the addressee. There's no one copied. The subject line says major issues at today's staff meeting. And I'll read out loud just so you can, to help us all process together the body of the email. Richard, I wanted to let you know that we'd had a staff meeting in the morning, even though you were unable to attend. Maureen informed everyone about the progress made by our department in solving the security issues. We also discussed some issues related to confidentiality of data filings and the budget update. You'll find the detailed description on your desk. Regards, Victor. So I want to know what you notice. So feel free to type in the chat. What do you notice about this email? And how would you feel if you got an email like this one? So that's kind of two questions. Feel free to answer either one. What do you notice, or how would you feel if you got this email? Seems unfriendly. Emily, I want to know why. How does it seem unfriendly?
I think the Richard, not dear Richard. I don't know why this person wasn't at the staff meeting, but there's something about the way that it's like, we did it even though you weren't there. I don't know. And the regards is just very, very formal. So I feel like maybe they just don't know each other very well, but it's definitely very stiff.
Okay. Okay, so someone says, okay, extra details added to Richard, so why mentioned. Other people say, cold, a little snarky because you didn't attend. Yeah, that's the way that's phrased. It's like, yeah, even though you couldn't be there, we went on without you. And there's certainly ways to say that we, sorry we missed you at the meeting, that communicate more connection than that does. Okay, the subject line makes Stephanie anxious. Yes. Subject line is definitely stressful. And where in the body does it talk about the major issues? I'm not satisfied. It's like, what were the major issues? Was it the confidentiality? Was it the security issues? Yeah, there is a disconnect between that subject line and what is in the body of the email. Yeah, agreed, Amanda. It seems direct, but it's lacking information.
Apparently Russell was there. Richard was the big issue. Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, Richard's absence at the meeting. So definitely this email could be it could be revised, right? Major issues at the staff meeting, or maybe it's sufficient to just say, I left the notes from the meeting today on your desk. And then the person can read them elsewhere, because sometimes you don't want to put sensitive things in an email for the very reasons we've discussed. It's archivable. Maybe it is about a person, and so you don't want it to be searchable or to be shared. So there may be reasons why you just want to point someone to something away from email. But I would say the biggest issue here is this high stress subject line, and then a pretty uninformative body of the email.
It's true too. I see Amanda commented, there's not really an option for feedback or questions. Like, it doesn't give a cue about what they want him to do with this. It's definitely the end of a conversation, not like what you're saying, like, hey, we can talk about this more, or like, it doesn't leave any opening to continue it. It's like, and that was that, and we're done. Which stresses most of us out. also.
Agreed. All right, let's look at another example. Okay. The subject line is problem. Okay, another like, what is it? And I'll let you read. Whoops, sorry. My rolly button is advancing. Okay, Superman. I was talking with Spider-Man yesterday and he mentioned there may be something funny going on at LexCorp. So I swung by there, did a little breaking and entering. Gotham PD gives me a pass on stuff like that and stole a few files. Long story short, you'll never believe what I found. I knew Lex Luthor was up to something, but I never thought he'd go this far. It's a shame such an incredible mind would resort to something so dastardly. Getting to the point, though, here's what I found. Lex is awfully jealous of the acclaim you've gotten, so he's hatched a scheme where he tricks me into fighting you. He's got his hands on some weird meteoric ore he's calling kryptonite. Sound familiar? Okay, so I'm reading the chat. Too much detail. Long story short, to get to the point, it's like, oh, why didn't you get to the point? Right, so here's a good example of like, where do you start the email?
Yeah.
Right, do you start from, oh, here's how I got to thinking about this, or here's the information that you need to know now?
Yeah, it is funny when you read an email where like mentally you're like, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Friend email, okay, too much detail. I'm just reading up on the chat.
And same like that subject line. So we're talking about ways to motivate someone to open email, right? And in both of these two, we've seen this example of like sort of striking the chord of urgency, or which I think can be, we get numb to it really quickly. So it's an unreliable way. It's an unreliable way to continue getting people to open emails. There is, in rhetorical theory, one of the ideas, they have this great idea called kairos that talks about personal urgency. So what is it that I have to tell you that is personally urgent to you? Why would it perk your attention? Like, what would make you like want to listen to this thing? So it's a little like, for a moment, thinking about like, why does this person actually need to know this? Most of the time there's a really obvious answer. In this case, it sounds like it could just say gossip, and the person would open the email instead of problem. To be honest, a lot of us would open that email if it was between friends. But it is like finding that thing or naming that thing that like for the student email I was talking about, I often write required writing submission or required writing assignment, because that is a thing most undergraduate students notice, something that is required of them, and it has to do with class. It's not exciting, but is something they read. Better to make a phone call. Yes.
I think that's really true too, is email the best way to communicate this message? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes it's definitely not.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah,
feedback.
and putting too much in is true. What is that joke? I think it was Mark Twain. You've brought this up, Shreen. Do you have that? What is that quote?
Yeah. Sorry, this letter is so long, but I ran out of time to make it shorter. Or something to that effect. Yeah. That's a paraphrase, but
yeah, it can take some crafting to actually create the shorter emails. For some of us, we just like open up and can write. And for others of us, we kind of land on the opposite side, maybe like the next example.
Okay, what do you want me to bring to the meeting? So there's no salutation, there's no capitalization, no question mark, there's no signature, and yes. and which meeting. So this reads like, to me, it reads like a text from one of my kids who refused to use any caps or any punctuation. But email is not text. So I would just say that as a caveat. And also, my kids' relationship to me is different from my relationship with my colleagues.
Yeah.
So it's nice that this colleague wants to know, right? I'm happy to bring something. What should it be? But it needs the framing of, so it needs the phatic speech, it needs a salutation, it needs the context explained, and a subject line. Here's another one. Yo, Mr. K, here's my application for your summer internship. Ben Henderson. What do you notice? Or how would you like to get this? Very informal for a job ad. Yeah.
Yo. Yeah.
Yo.
Yeah, I used to crack up. There was this chunk of time where I started getting emails from students that would address me as bro. And I was like, I feel like this is meant as a compliment, but I'm very unsure how to respond to being called bro. And then I did learn, that it was just really funny. I was like, I don't feel like, but it would often be like, my paper's going to be late. And I was like, oh, but no, that was a mismatch of purpose and friendliness. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize too. So maybe when the student and Mr. K talk, maybe yo is fine when they're at a football game together or when they're in class, and maybe that's the kind of conversational tone they have. But in this situation, he is asking for a job application. So even though he has a certain relationship with that person that may be casual, the fact that he's asking for a job is pointing to a completely different rhetorical situation and a place where this might be in his personnel file forever or in an application file. Thought needs to be given to that, okay, yes, Mr. K is really cool, but maybe I want to spell out his name and say, dear Mr. K, I was excited to learn about your summer internship. Here's why I think I'm a good applicant, and attached is my application. Sincerely, Ben. And also the all caps just looks like someone who's not very familiar with technology. And it conveys a tone that seems disrespectful. It seems like shouting. All righty, take it away, Amy.
So what about this one? This one has a little bit different. What do we think? So I think this one is interesting to think about a little differently. What do we think this person's, it does look like spinning. What do we, pardon me. What do we think Amy's intent is with this? What's the goal? Why would someone want to do this in an email? It might not be working, but also, I mean, maybe it is working. So what is maybe she intending, but what is the effect? Yeah. Is that Comic Sans? I know, bringing up the old school. So much happening. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot, and there's a request in there, right? This meeting will go a lot smoother if everyone comes with 3 items they'd like to see addressed. So there's like an actual specific request of something needed for the meeting. And also it is hard to read quickly and there's a lot going on. I know it's like the first thing I see is I believe in this team. If I opened this, it requires conscientiously going back to see that in the meeting on Friday, there will be changes to the quarterly metrics, which you obviously don't know what that means, but like, it sounds like that's weighty. If you're changing how things are being measured in general, that seems like a big idea. And they need to come up with 3 items for them, but then the rest is like cheerleading. But yes, also visibly confusing. It does have 10 things going on at one time. I know. I am in a similar boat. I think there was an era of emailing where this was happening more. At least maybe the people I'm emailing are not doing that as much, but there was like a spam email time. Everybody had an aunt who sent emails like this, right? I did. I had a couple aunts that sent emails like this. And I think still do, but now it looks like emojis.
And
It's
they
like
were like
strings
first grade teachers or something. I
Mhm.
don't know.
Now it's like ellipses and emojis and GIFs. That's what the new version of that is on texting. Yes, excellent. Let's see. All right, so we're gonna shift gears. Oh, and we're at about 10 till 11. Okay. So we want to think about, we have these 2 prompts to think about. You could pick one. If pick one that maybe feels like it'd be something closer to what you might need to do, or you can kind of however it feels the most relevant to you. But think for a minute, like if you were writing this, what would you choose for a subject line? And you could also give us some context. Like if I have, if I have to ask them to bring questions, you might choose one of these questions. What's an idea for subject line? How formal would you personally need to be? Or where would you begin the body of an email? I'll put these questions in the chat real quick, just to get us thinking about, and these may be things, so you may just keep these questions. I'd just like to have it be quiet for a minute or 2 to think about, like, if you personally had to do this, what would your context be? And would there be tension? Would it be easy? Would you need to get people's attention? What would you put for a subject line? How formal would you need to be? Starting to think through what some of your choices would be. And you can, if you find a kernel of that, would like you to think bigger than what you'd put in the chat. But if you find a kernel of that you'd like to put in the chat to share, that would be great. But I'm going to set a little timer for a minute and a half now that I've been chatting. It's one thing I think when I see, oh yeah, that's a great, the feedback requested. It's a good one. Yeah. When to use the first name that's a great question. Just to think about, like, can I just tell you? Yeah, and I like feedback requested. I also use like survey response requested, or I need your vote, like input requested by blank, like in the subject line, feedback requested by 4 p.m. feedback requested by tomorrow at noon. Just because we all respond pretty well to having something concrete, or sorry, urgent feedback needed, little red exclamation mark, high status. I often think with these options too, it matters if people are going to be sad that a clinic has been delayed. Are they going to be, change in schedule is really good. That's only you would know the impact that's having on people. Is this, they're not going to get a paycheck until the clinic opens, or do they, have is their schedule changed or accelerated? Yeah, but change in schedule is great. These are some really good examples that we'll get. Like we care about the schedule and timeline of things. And so it's also a kindness to let people know in a subject line that you're giving them information that they need, that they will also appreciate, especially if they're schedule driven people. Gosh, we're almost out of time, so I'm gonna just move us ahead. We just have a couple more slides. This one very briefly, is just a quick comment about reply versus reply all. And the dangers of reply all and the dangers of forwarding something without looking all the way through what you're forwarding. Because if this hasn't happened, then to you, then oh my gosh, you are a lucky unicorn at this point in the technological world. But be cautious about whether you're applying to everyone in the original email or just the person who sent it. This goes back, if we go to the next slide, this is just a very useful, this is another kind of language that you might find useful, letting someone know what's happening as you're doing it. I'm going to keep this super short. To sum up, I need blank by blank. These can be some of those things where you're just, hey, I'm on my way to a meeting, so I have to make this really fast, but blank. Is a really nice way to just have an inserted comment, but actually I don't have time to write a whole email. I just really need to get this to you, because it gives somebody a way to understand what your writing is doing. It gives some really overt context. Or, hi, I'm panicking. Hi, I'm panicking. Can you help me with blank? Yeah, that can explain a lot of other contextual things. Finally, just takeaway tips. Your emails are a reflection of you, whether we want them to be or not. They are, of us professionally, in our roles, the way we're embodying the spaces of our networks, of our teams, keeping in mind your audience, keeping in mind whether things are private, how long they last, if you're gonna want to archive them later, thinking about your own emotional state before sending. Are you worked up? Are you panicked? Do you need to say I'm panicking? I've written that as a reply to emails before, like, your email is making me panic. Have I not understood anything so far? Or something like, sometimes I just can't have anything to say, but nervous now because I just read the email. Am I understanding you correctly? That blank. Using exclamation points. So this is a quick summary, always using a signature though, proofreading, just even a quick one sometimes. We don't have to belabor it, but a lot of times the more worked up or more tense we are, the more likely we are to have errors in our writing. That is useful to know. The more complicated it is, the more amped up we are, the more likely that we have some like wonky typos.
And I would say that's also a time to say, well, maybe I will delay sending this email. Sometimes we feel like we must respond immediately, but sometimes waiting a half hour or an hour or a day, depending on the weight of the email, can help us be clearer about the message we want to be sending and not have it be too emotional.
Also, in groups of people, sometimes if you wait to hit reply, something else evolves about the situation. I've plenty of times I've been like, I'm just going to sit on this for 4 hours because I'm so amped up. And within that time, somebody else replies and like, that's incorrect. We've actually done blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. That's what I thought. But I was, so with groups of people, there is always, and I've also on the other side of that been the person to jump in and be like, no, wait, that's not true. That's not true. Everybody don't panic. Remember, we actually did this thing. So there is a space in which sometimes we just have to be real about our reactions to things, but it's important to choose those moments. Just like we do in, face-to-face or Zoom interactions.